bit and share my thoughts about this wonderful music we all love, jazz. As I was thinking about this talk and what I would like to, talk about, I thought one way to go about it would be to talk about why this music, what it means to me, how I came to this music. Um, Over the pandemic, I got to do a lot of different live streaming master classes and workshops and talking with different students all over the world. And one theme kind of kept coming up, and it was the topic of jazz composition. And for me personally, it's a really important topic because it has helped me uh, find what I would say my voice within this music and also as an individual. So I think that's where I'll start. Um, I came to this music by a little bit of a different route. I'm from Houston, Texas, originally born and raised. Actually, I'm here right now, checking up on my folks who are still here. And it's mid 70s. Thank you very much. Super nice, lovely day. But I started classical piano and violin at age 5 and thought, I wanted to be a concert pianist. Um, and also, I always thought of myself as the pianist who played the music that composers like Bach or Beethoven, Mozart, etc., Chopin, they were the composers. I was the pianist who played their music. So it never occurred to me that I would write music. So I was finishing up my undergraduate degree in classical piano performance at the University of Texas at Austin. And I guess I was ready for jazz by then, because ironically, I went to this celebrated high school in Houston, HSPVA, High School for the Performing Visual Arts, where so many of today's great jazz artists are from. Folks like Chris Dave, Jason Moran, Robert Glasper, Eric Harlan, Kendrick Scott, Jamar Williams. I mean, it's amazing. The list just continues. But I was such a devoted and very dutiful classical pianist back then, and never had a single interaction with the jazz department. So at UT, I guess I was finally ready. And then after that, just starting to get into the music, I never thought I was going to switch into jazz music. I just thought, well, this is something I find really amazing and want to be a part of. So I started reading about it because I didn't know any jazz musicians. My family, my parents are immigrants from China via Taiwan, very stable traditional professions of engineer and nurse, and we didn't know any artists. So already just me studying music was kind of a scandalous thing. But then when I started getting into jazz, that was just like, I think it kind of blew their gasket, my parents' gaskets. But this art form, that as the more I learned about it, the more I fell in love with it, and just what an incredibly profound, noble art form that requires the same amount of dedication and commitment that classical did. And I think even more, because jazz, you're creating the music, where in classical music, in some ways, you're recreating it. So, you have to start becoming a composer. But I didn't know that at the point. All I knew is like, how do you play music with no music? Learning that jazz is a language, that improvisation involves learning vocabulary. And I was so fortunate to be accepted into the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz Performance. It's now renamed the Herbie Hancock Institute. But I was part of the first class. It was at the New England Conservatory in Boston. So that's what brought me to the East Coast for the first time. And there, it was a life-changing opportunity for me, because we got to work with the generation of jazz masters that unfortunately many are passing on. And I think that generation was very unique because they were there when the music was being developed, being invented, so to speak, being created in real time. And the legendary bassist, Ron Carter, he said something that really changed my life as a musician. He would teach us about every 2 weeks. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, if you want to find your voice in this music, you need to write your own music. And, finding my own voice in something, that was something I never really thought about. And it coming from a culture where, the Asian culture that values conformity and obedience and not causing waves, it's not about having a voice. And then studying classical piano with a teacher from the Russian school, where it's all about my way, you do not have an opinion. And then, the Asian culture, we revere our teachers and we never question them because they're the teacher, right? So just coming with that mindset and looking at the world like that, it was truly revolutionary to realize, oh my goodness, they are expecting us to write music. And every time Mr. Carter came through, oh, hello, somebody said hi, Helen, to me on Facebook. I want to say hello and thank you for joining me and joining us today. Every time he came through, we would have to have another piece ready, and this was a small jazz program, 7 students that formed a jazz septet. And so he would have everybody play through everybody's compositions. And then, Mr. Carter has been on thousands of records. He's played with like everybody. So he's played so many different types of music. So that he, what an amazing experience, right? He was saying, well, he would make a suggestion, do this, try this, or I don't think that works. And then having to play other people's original compositions, that was very just illuminating also. So, doing that for 2 years. At that time, I wasn't realizing this is such an incredible experience. I was just like, oh my God, I have to have another piece ready in like a week. But looking back, that was such a valuable thing to go through. And so once I graduated, I didn't know what would come next. Like I said, I didn't know any artists per se. I knew I wanted to play, wanted to perform this music somehow. So after I moved to New York, I started meeting musicians, going to sessions where we would have a chance to play each other's compositions. And I kept writing music. I didn't have a lot of gigs at that point, so I had a lot of time to practice and to think about just, why do I do this music? Why am I doing this? It was a tough time. It was challenging because I didn't know if I was going to make it, whatever that meant, or support myself through this music. So I just wrote music and I decided to start recording. Made my first record and try to get gigs. And fast forward 20 years later, I'm so grateful to have found a place in jazz. Jazz to me is one of the most generous art forms in so many ways because it has influenced every type of popular music in this country, being one of the few native art forms to this country through the African American culture and experience. And it can take in any type of influence, but yet jazz doesn't lose its core identity. And I don't think there's many art forms you can say that about. And to me, that speaks to the strength of this music and, the terrible circumstances of our history, that where it came from, the great suffering and just darkness and evil, but to still emerge from that, I think that's another thing that makes jazz so special. I heard someone talk about once how, the African Americans were freed and now they were having to grapple with this freedom and how will they live. And then part of it was their, artistic soul expression. Mary Lou Williams, the great jazz pianist, composer, educator, arranger. I just taught a class on her for jazz at Lincoln Center Swing University. And one thing she said, that jazz is music for the soul. And I really agree with that. And it's healing for the soul. And so it was important that people who participated for the African American community, that everybody be given a voice, that everybody has a chance to express themselves. And I think that you can see that clearly in the art form. And that reminds me of something that the great Jimmy Heath, who was actually our second teacher at the Monk Institute when I was there. You know, he had all the best sayings. Like, I still repeat them when I teach today. And one of the best ones, he said, for him, you know, what democracy is supposed to look like is the jazz bandstand. Everybody has a role to fulfill. Everybody has to do their homework. They come and you know, they fulfill their responsibilities to the music, to the band, to the group. Everybody gets a chance to solo and say something, but in the end, together they create something greater than they could on their own. I think that's such a beautiful way to conceptualize jazz, and I think it's very apropos. So, finding one's voice. So I really, I think about what Mr. Carter said, especially in my own teaching. You know, why does composing, writing jazz help you to find your voice? And I think because composition is, you have to make choices. You know, you have to decide, I want this piece or this section to be this long. I want the melody to sound like this or be like this. I want this phrase, you know, the smaller you can get more detailed. I want the phrase to go like this or up or down, or I want the groove to be like this. I want the harmonic progression to sound or move in this way. And I think those choices that you make reflect you know, your personal tastes, what you hear in your mind. And I also, that brings to mind something the great Gil Goldstein said. I went to one of his composition seminars, and he said, as musicians, and I think he was, of course, talking about composers, but as composers, we're always hearing things, you know, in our mind's ear. And he said, but every now and then there are seeds, he called them musical seeds, that come by into your frame of consciousness that are meant just for you. And when that happens, you have to pay it. You have to be paying attention, and then you have to realize that it's arrived, and then you have to grab it and then make it into what it was supposed to be. He said, if you don't, it'll pass you by, and you know, nobody's gonna. It's not a crime or anything like that, but it's just, that was just something that was for you. And I really believe that, because when I write music, especially when I first started writing, like the first few attempts, I would be like, oh yeah, this kind of is like a style of a standard, or this is kind of in the style of one of my favorite composers, you know, something that maybe like you borrowing the harmonic language of Wayne Shorter or Herbie Hancock. And I would think, well, let me keep digging a little further. And I would describe it like peeling away the layers of an onion. Oh my God, more people. Hello. Thank you so much for saying hello. That makes me feel good that there are people out there listening. Yeah, so I'm peeling away the layers of an onion until I get to something that I feel like, oh, this is something that only I could write. And it's not like it's something that's so incredibly complex or brilliant, but somehow I know that it's from me. And because people have asked me, Helen, how do you decide, how do you write a piece of music? And I said, well, I wish I had a formula. You know, sometimes it's a rhythmic groove that I'm hearing, or sometimes the melody just comes out. Other times it's a harmonic progression, or just, and then I just kind of let it, you know, sometimes it's a hard slog, you know. I mean, I had the chance to hang out with Wayne Shorter, and he told me some days he would sit at the piano and he just keep playing the progression he was working on until he was sure what the next chord was supposed to be. And I was like, oh my God, if Wayne Shorter's saying that, you know, because, you know, but I think that's why his music has such a quality of just inevitability. It just has to be that, because he's distilled it down to the essence of that. And by the way, I decided last minute to go to Boston last Friday to catch the premiere of his new opera co-written with Esperanza Spalding, Iphigenia, and it was just amazing to hear Wayne's musical language in an operatic setting. So I'll tell you about the first piece I ever wrote that I considered a keeper. It's a piece called The Waiting Game, and I had, you know, just graduated from the Monk Institute and was sitting around and like, what happens next? And I guess this is something I inherited from my folks. I'm very practical too in some ways. So I said, well, let me use something I'm working on right now that's giving me fits, which for the musicians out there was the two half diminished seventh to the 5/7 to the minor one progression, where I was like, I can't improvise well over this. My hands would always get tongue tied. And there are pieces that have this progression. Probably the most well known one that comes to mind immediately for me is Dizzy Gillespie's Woody and You. So I decided, well, let me write a piece with that. So at least, because practicing progressions as exercises can get a little bit dry. But let me put it in a piece and see if it can be more fun or more creative. And so I call it like composing it's like Lego composing, putting different bits and pieces. So I had the two half diminished seven to the 5/7, and then I combined it with something from a McCoy Tyner tune that I liked. And then it was an AABA song. And then the bridge, I would say, was my material. And at the end, I had like some rhythmic displacement. It's so funny when I do these talks on composition, I realize that rhythm, which I really consider my weak point, because, as a classical artist, how you interpret and approach rhythm is so different from jazz. So, but rhythmic displacement, or just little just playing against the prevailing meter is something that I've incorporated in a lot of my writing, which I hadn't realized until I was doing these kind of like little mini surveys of stuff that I'd written. So the waiting game, and that song I still play today. And so it's been just an incredible journey. And I have to say, every time I write another song, I'm just like, whoo, glad I wrote another. You never know if you're going to ever write one that you really like. So, wow, all these wonderful messages. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, people are mentioning the jazz and neuroscience program. I'd love to talk about that a little bit. So, like I said, I'm just so grateful that jazz music made room for me, and I've gotten some really amazing opportunities. And one of them was to be the jazz artist in residence, the first one at Columbia University's Zuckerman Mind Brain Behavior Institute. And it was so inspiring to meet these, they're Nobel Prize winning researchers. But these scientists are studying the physical processes of how we experience our world, how we live. One of the Nobel Prize, Eric Kandel winners, he narrowed down the physical process that happens when a memory is formed, which is mind-blowing. And, that's something that's become an area of particular importance for me, because I have loved ones who unfortunately have been diagnosed with dementia. And I met a scientist there whose research was in memory. And just to know, I knew music always had been a powerful therapeutic tool, right? There's already music therapies. I've been hearing about that since I was in school and middle school. But now, just how music is an incredible tool in helping people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and bringing them back to themselves, even if it's temporary. But it's an amazing experience. So we have partnered with an organization in New York City called Arts and Minds, who serve people of that population. They serve that population. But before we contacted them, their programs were all visual arts based. So we said, do you want music programs? And they were like, yes. So the scientist from the Zuckerman Institute, she connected Zuckerman with Arts and Minds, and then I brought in the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, because the Zuckerman Institute is in Harlem, and one of their mission is to engage the local community. So we did 2 programs during my residency year, which was 2019. We did one just for Arts and Minds folks, and then one for the general audience, where we paired myself and a scientist from the Institute, and we talked about memory and music. And we continued this on through the pandemic, which was amazing to do. It's been just thrilling to talk to these folks as we talk about things like how we experience rhythm, or just the social environment, what happens in the brain when we hear something, the auditory cortex. It's been an incredible learning experience, and I'm really excited for the latest for this fall programming, I got a little grant to co-create with one of the scientists that I met. She's a neuro rehabilitation researcher, but with a extensive background in dance. So we're creating a movement program with original music geared for folks with dementia. She's actually doing research right now with folks at Ohio State University with a program called Dance for Dementia. And then I guess the last, oh, wow, a concert with John Faddis. Oh my God, that was like one of the last public performances I did in 2019. Oh, thank you so much for being there. Yes, yes. Oh, wow. Yeah, so, that's just, the brain is so, it's a magnificent mystery and so powerful, and it's enables us to do what we do, and it enables, like, just the processes that it takes to hold a cup or just to know to reach for a cup. It's just mind blowing. So if you can join us, you can go to the Arts and Minds, just look them up, or National Jazz Museum. Our next program will be December the 15th. So, getting to write music in a way that serves those people is very meaningful, and just, again, music for the soul, and I don't think they realize just how powerful jazz is. And I've witnessed at one of the programs where there was one member of the audience, he was progressively declining, unfortunately, and he was not responsive, but we taught them the lyrics to Sea Jam Blues, and we had a microphone that I thought folks would want to come up and sing it, but they were shy, so we passed the microphone around. But then when we got to this gentleman, he took the mic and he started singing the lyrics clear as a bell. And another gentleman stood up, and a lady, and they started dancing. We were doing a Latin version of Caravan by Duke Ellington, and he could dance. It was stunning. We were like, it was an emotional moment for everybody, just to see how music brings us together, how it connects us within ourselves and also with each other. So, in terms of what's coming up for me, y'all can say prayers for Helen, because this is really scary. I probably am embarking on my most challenging compositional project yet. I was so amazed to be named a Guggenheim Fellow in 2021, and I had the project I want to do with that is my big band project. And writing for big band, whoo, it's so scary. But as the wonderful bassist Rufus Reed, I find him so inspiring as somebody who, I'm not going to say he's old, but he's older than me, but he's still so curious about everything, about growing, about learning. And he said, because I said to him, writing big band is so challenging, because there's like, as a pianist, Helen, you should be fine because you got 10 fingers. And I said, yes, but it's like, how do I decide who to give what, right? And Rufus said, but Helen, it's all about the process. So that was so encouraging to me. And that will be probably take up most of next year in terms of writing. And I have a couple of residencies at university jazz festivals where I'll get to workshop the music, and I'm writing a group of songs inspired by the jazz masters that I studied with at the Monk Institute. Not quite like Mary Lou Williams, I've referenced her again, the Zodiac Suite that she wrote, where the signs of the Zodiac were inspired by musicians that she knew that were that sign. But I'm going to try and write music that hopefully will evoke people like Clark Terry, like Sir Roland Hanna, Jimmy Heath, that's evoke their incredible just spirit, what I learned from them, what they taught me, their stylistic quirks and stuff like that. So, oh wow, who's your brother? That's really amazing. Yeah, Eric Kandel is like 90 something. He still walks to the Zuckerman Institute from his apartment, because he was telling me how walking, just any form of physical activity releases osteocontin. I think it's a hormone from your bones that is protective for your brain neural networks. So, word to the wise, physical activity, exercise is good for all of us. Yeah, so, I hope to record that. I want to perform this. I'm calling it Jazz Portraits, or Portraits in Jazz. I can't remember. I was kicking around both titles, and perform both in Houston and also where I'm from, and also in New York City. So, I guess the last thing I want to tell you about is just my current project that came out. Let me see if I have a copy here. That came out a couple of months ago, and yeah, I do have a copy. I'm not as scatterbrained as I thought, but it's called Quartet Plus, and it's my attempt to bring to write for strings and include that because I also played violin, classical violin, and have always wanted to write for strings. So it was my jazz quartet plus a wonderful string quartet called Harlem Quartet, and it's music all by women, which that kind of happened by accident. It was informed by the grant that I got from the New York Foundation for the Arts, and I'm really excited. I'm going to Europe for the first time since January of 2020. Going to Poland at the end of this month, where my quartet will be collaborating with Poland's foremost string quartet called the Atom String Quartet. They play a lot of crossover genres, so I'm really excited and looking forward to that. It's going to be really. It's always a cool experience meeting new musicians and interacting with new communities and stuff like that. It's one of my favorite festivals in Poland. Actually, Poland's one of my favorite places in Europe, favorite places to play music, and they love jazz. So if you think of, we're leaving the day after Thanksgiving, so if you think of me, you can say a little prayer for safe travels and just resuming the artist life, which was so different during the pandemic. In terms of gigs coming up in the city, I'm starting to play with the Mingus Big Band again. They're playing right now at a venue called the Django, which is down at the Roxy Hotel down in, I guess it's right near Canal Street, the Canal Street stop. I'm playing at the Soapbox Gallery with a vocalist named Jillian Margot the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And then I'm blanking. Oh, I'm doing something with the Rutgers University Jazz Ensemble, December 3rd, Friday. And then I think I might go into my composition retreat, serious, intense compositioning hermit hibernation. I guess that's the better word, to get this music started. So thank you so much for spending part of your Monday afternoon with me, and thank you again to Gail Boyd and all the folks at Alternative Venues for Jazz. And let me see if there were any final questions. Oh, just a lot of sweet hellos. I wish I could see your names. It just says Facebook user, because that's why I'm not saying people's names. But I really appreciate you guys stopping by, and please continue to take care of yourselves and each other's. Stay safe, and hope to see you again very soon at a jazz club or jazz venue or jazz festival near you. Take care. Bye.